There you go. Okay. So again, today we're talking about ad hoc pivot reports and data source join. My name is Tommy DeMasi. I'm the QA and support analyst here at eLogic. I have 8 years of training experience as well as 7 years experience in system analyst. I joined eLogic. I used to work, recently I joined eLogic, excuse me. I used to work at a client of eLogic, and I actually was part of the implementation of eLogic to my old company. So I love them so much, I'm now part of their team. I am married with a little boy who's 4 years old. His name is Calvin. And if I am not here, I am at the beach, in the mountains, or at Disney World. Today we're going to talk about pivot tables and data source joins. Pivot tables, we're going to identify the purpose of using a pivot table. We're going to create a pivot table so you can see how to do it. And then I'm going to go into an explanation of data sources and kind of give you best practices with data sources. Again, I'm going to leave the lines open, so you're welcome to chime in with any questions. If there's any background noise that does come about throughout the training, I will go ahead and mute everybody, but until then, I will let you know when I do that. Okay. So pivot tables. What is a pivot table? Why do you want to use a pivot table? When you're if you're making a report that's going to be presented to a client or to a manager, you may want to take complex data and make it easy to read. Kind of a high-level type view of your data. Just a way of arranging the information from left to right instead of in rows. So if you're doing some administration and some analyzing of data, you're going to want all that information in rows, and so that you can manipulate the data when it's in an Excel. But if you're presenting a report, it might look a little nicer to put it in a pivot. So for instance, if you're doing, if you want to count the number of curriculum completions by organization, or maybe count the number of curriculum completions by user or by curriculum name itself, would be a good way to present that data. Another example would be registrations by month or quarter. So if you're looking at who's registering for what curriculum, you can do it by quarter or by month and do a pivot so that you can analyze that data quickly. If you're an e-commerce client, it's a nice way to look at sales. So by curriculum. So who's buying what and how much in a quick, easy view. I'm going to go ahead and create a pivot so we can see how to set one up and what it looks like. I'm going to use the curriculum activity and user data source. I'm going to select think for a minute. Or not. Okay, so this is when you move too fast to the computer, all the data sources aren't presented. There's a nice little tip. Sometimes you have to go back and select your data sources again, and sometimes you have to go out and come back in, but there we go. So as you can see, now we have all our data. So you'll see your data source, curriculum activity, and source user. So I'm going to select organization under user because I want to visually group the pivot table by the organization. I want the user's first name and last name. For those of you that are just joining, thank you for joining today. Just an FYI, I am recording this for future training purposes. as well as I'm leaving the lines open for any questions if you have any questions throughout the training. But if we do we do have a lot of background noise, I will have to mute everybody. And now I'm going to create my pivot. So I'm going to select the Add Pivot option. I'm going to select curriculum name. And all my data sources are not there. We're moving slow here for some reason. So I'm thinking quicker than the system, which is very unusual because that usually doesn't happen. It's usually slower than the computer. So, okay. All right. I'm going to refresh and come back real quick. Sorry about this. All right. Let's do it again. Oh, there we are. Yay. Okay. Select curriculum name. I'm going to leave it as group. I'm going to group it by curriculum name. There are other options that you can select for date. So if you're doing it, what we've mentioned, if you're doing a registration by month or an e-commerce sale, you could do it. It'll give you options to group it by month, by day, or by year, by quarter. So there's a lot more options that you can do in that drop-down. My next selection, I'm going to do completion date to see when the user completed the course, the last time they completed it. You can count the number of completions. I'm going to bring back the latest completion date, so I'm going to choose maximum. If I want the first completion date, I would choose minimum. Count distinct is eliminating any possibilities of duplicate data, so it'll give you a more distinct count. I'm going to select maximum. And then you could format how you want your dates to look. So if you wanted time in there, you can add time as well. I'm just going to do the standard date option. And then I'm going to add another. I also want to know their score. So I added a row. I select score. And again, I want the latest. I'm going to do maximum. Do with score, you get more options like average, count to save, summing it. I, again, just want the latest score that was on that user's record. Also, because I'm doing this pivot, I like to kind of arrange my data a little cleaner. So I'm going to use the advanced field settings and make sure my data in those columns are in the middle, because otherwise sometimes it gets jumbled with the columns next to it. So I'm going to censor that information. Now, a lot of you probably have a lot of curriculum in your system, if not specifically a lot of courses. So with a pivot, you probably want to make sure that you control that size. Because again, this is making complex data simple, easy to read. So you don't want hundreds of columns of curricula in one report. You probably want to focus what you're evaluating and select the type of curriculum that you're looking for. So I'm going to do it by name. I have more than one that I want to select, so I'm going to do multiple. You can also use checkboxes. So if you are going to open up the filter for other users to use, sometimes when it's a multiple choice, you probably want to use the checkbox option so they can see it in checkbox. Use the multiple. I've hit my control. Okay. Selected. Now I'm going to save this report. Anytime you make a change to your report, you'll want to save it before you preview it, because sometimes if you don't save it, you'll get the same report view that you had prior to saving the change. Especially if you export it. Here's what a pivot looks like. You can see there's my organization. You click on it, it collapses. Here are the names of the user. Here are the courses that I've selected. It'll say the date that it was completed, if there is a completion date, or, and it'll also show you users who haven't. So it'll show that those 2 users haven't completed these courses. So a pivot also gives you that view as well. Or if there isn't a score, but there is a completion date, so the course that just had a completion. Any questions on pivot? Okay, great. We're going to jump into data sources. Go back over. You can select new here, or you can go to report list. I'm going to select new. So this is your first tab. When you go to add a new report, your first tab is going to be data sources. So this is data sources. These are your data categorized. They're also known as tables in your LMS where data is stored. So when you look at this, you can see it's categorized by certain aspects of the LMS. So attributes, anything that you've created. So attributes are the user-defined fields. So a lot of our clients use job title, hire date, are attributes in the system. So this will give you, this category will give you data information about the attributes that are created and the values that are in those attributes. Certification, Obviously, it'll give you anything about your certification. So if you set up certifications that attach to certain curriculum, then this table will give you some data or information regarding your certification. So again, checklists. So there's 3 categories for checklists that will give you information specific about the answers in the checklist, the details, and the response. So with data sources, you can select one data source and run a report. A lot of times under curriculum activity, it's enough to run a report. You don't need more than one data source. Most of our reports will include at least one additional data source, if not more. So I want to show you, I want to go through some examples and what it means to join data sources. So my examples here, I have 2 data sources, and I think these are the most commonly used. If they're not joined together, they're usually joined to another table of some sort, so these can be the most common tables. The user table will give you everything you need to know about the user. That's their name, their email, their contact information, their address, their business address, their organization, their manager's name. So it's filled with data regarding the user themselves. Curriculum activity. Any type of activity going on in your curriculum. Excuse me, my voice is correct. So registration, completion, where they're at in that curriculum, who created that curriculum. So this data source is great for the curriculum itself and what's happening with that curriculum. So when you are on that first page and you select your data source, so again, you can select one or you can select multiple. So when you're on that first page and you select those checkboxes for the data sources that you want to use, it's going to automatically do an inner join. What is an inner join? It's going to take those 2 data sources and it's going to say, this user, so I'm using user as an example, user data source, user ABC took curriculum 1, 2, 3. It's going to take that and it's going to provide you with data that matches in both data sources. So when you run a report on an inner join, it's only going to provide you users that have taken or registered for courses, compliance path, training sessions, checklist, library items, what have you. So it's going to automatically join that information. If you want to take information that may not be linked in those 2 data sources, then you want to do an outer join. An outer join would be, an example would be if I want users that have taken courses for compliance paths and training sessions, but also users that have not registered or not taken that curriculum. So we did see in the pivot that was something that a pivot table would do without doing an outer join. So if you wanted to create some sort of pivots that did that, you could just use your inner join option and the pivot will actually create that for you. But if you're not doing a pivot table and you're just doing a normal road report, you could do an outer join. How do you do that? I'm going to show you. On here, if I hit Advanced under Data Sources, it's going to ask me to select my tables. So if I wanted to select User again, and then select the little gray box, add my row, and I wanted to select Curriculum Activity again. It's going to automatically join them as an inner join. It has the right linking by user keys, so I'm doing the curriculum by user, which is good. But if you wanted to do an outer join, this is where you would do it. I would do it right because I'm a user. I want to get user information, so users that haven't registered or haven't completed a course. So that's what an outer join is. There are other options here that really aren't applicable for our LMS, but I did want to kind of explain what they were so you knew what they were, and we don't suggest you using either of these options. So a cross join is taking each row from the first table, so we took each row from the user table, and then each row from the second table, curriculum activity. So it would combine them row by row. So for instance, if you had 10 records in the user table and 10 records in the curriculum table that matched, it would present you 100 rows for that one piece of information you're trying to find. So again, we don't suggest this. It's going to give you multiple rows of information that will probably be more confusing than helpful. So the other option there is a full join. That's taking everything from the tables that you selected and being able to report off of it. So it may not match. It's really just a data dump of information that has no linking at all. So it's probably something you'll never want to use. We can't think of an example of why that would be useful in our LMS. So we suggest you not use it. But I did want to explain what that is so that you understand what those options are. The other thing I wanted to talk about is when you add some kind of warnings, I guess I should say, or tips, I should say. So let's say you're adding a third table here. Oops, let's say you're going to do the user attribute details. You want to get job code of people who have completed the curriculum. Just keep in mind these right here. So it says user attributes detail. What we see a lot with our clients, they try to do the attribute. They typically have curriculum first, then they'll have user, and then they'll have the attribute. And what they try to do is connect the attribute details to the curriculum activity. That causes tons of rows of information because you're linking an attribute to a curriculum when an attribute is linked to a user. If you think about it, when you add an attribute to this LMS itself, you're adding it to the user management page, right? So to the user's account. You want to think through that when adding more than one table, because you really have to think about where that field is in the LMS, because you could be causing the report to fail just because it can't find the attribute associated with the curriculum versus trying to associate with the user. So as you can see, mine automatically links to the user, excuse me, and you want to use the user key as the link. Another example of something we see is organization, trying to link organization to curriculum activity. You can do that if it's the only two tables you're using, but be very careful if you add user to that, because what we'll do is it'll duplicate information. It's going to take the organization to the curriculum versus the organization to the user. So again, you have user in there, you'll want to link most of the items to the user because it's about the user, it's like user's organization that completed the curriculum. Another good tip, if you are having user as the if you're just selecting user as one of the data sources, always use that at the top of your example. Okay. Any questions about data sources? All right. Well, that is all I have for today. So if there aren't any further questions, we do plan to have a few more training sessions this year, every other week. So in 2 weeks, have another one. If you go to www.elogiclearning.com, you'll have the list of future training sessions. we hope to see you there. Thank you all for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thanks.